This is the lore-accurate Titan build for Grandmasters, raids, and even dungeons. Really any activity that has a bunch of champions. We're talking again about a Peregrine Greaves build, but this time, unlike using a Void build, we're going with Solar. And the reason why was because the surge for last week's GM and this week's GM that just happened on reset is Solar Surge. So instead of using a Void Titan, we want to use a Solar Titan so we get that plus 25% damage buff. And while Void Titan does have advantages like the ability to finish an enemy and be invisible, offering you a lot more stealth and survivability when going in for these super powerful shoulder charges, Solar Titan has a really nice added benefit of restoration, revitalizing blast, debuffing enemies. This basically makes you feel like you're back in the D1 days where you're hitting a shoulder charge on your Solar Titan to debuff the boss. And on top of that, due to our exact subclass setup with Roaring Flames, we can actually make our shoulder charge even more powerful, so powerful that it can one-shot anything. With that being said, let's break down this entire build. All of the gameplay you see here behind me was in the Grandmaster Corrupted, but this will work for any Grandmaster if you want to. Starting off first with our subclass. We're of course going to use the Hammer Super. This is the best damage output for your super. On top of that, it gives you the safety of being able to throw them from a distance. And then for our class ability, we're going with Towering Barricade. This is going to block some incoming fire from enemies. And on top of that, it's going to replenish some of our abilities due to some of the mods on our armor that we'll get to in just a minute here. For the jump, we of course have Catapult Lift. Using this lift and spamming your jump button, you can Titan Skate, as you'll see me doing here. For the melee, we're going with Hammer Strike. Of course, we absolutely have to use this when using Peregrine Greaves. The exotic boots don't work with Baby Hammer, so this is a must-have for this build. And honestly, just as a side note, there is nothing more satisfying than hitting that super powerful shoulder charge and one-shotting a champ. I could just do this all day. Love this build so much. For the grenade, we're definitely going with Thermite Grenade. It's very important to pick this one over Healing Grenade. Even though the Healing Grenade does offer some really nice utility with restoration, you're really going to want Thermite for so many different reasons, and we'll go over those reasons as we go through the rest of the subclass and armor. The first reason being that Roaring Flames reads final blows with solar abilities or ignitions increase the damage of your solar abilities stacks 3 times. So what you end up doing is throwing your Thermite Grenade at a pile of red bar enemies. After this kills just a couple enemies, you'll get your Roaring Flame stacks up to 3, which will make your shoulder charge even more powerful on top of the Peregrine Greaves buff, which is why I'm able to one-shot enemies, mini bosses, and tormentors. On top of that, the next aspect we're using is Sol Invictus, which is that our solar ability final blows, i.e. our Thermite Grenade, our shoulder charge, and our super all are giving us sunspots. And on top of that, any weapon kill that you get while scorching combatants will also create sunspots for you, which is especially epic this season when using Polaris Lance, Sunshot, or Vex Mythoclast, or really any solar weapon because of the seasonal artifact mod, Kindling Trigger, which basically makes it so that all of your solar weapons always scorch enemies, which means that there are so many sunspots all over the place. If you like fire, this is the build for you. Now moving on down to the fragments, it's important that we pick the right fragments. First one is going to be Ember of Empyrean. This one is really nice when using Polaris Lance or any solar weapon. It'll extend the effects of Restoration and Radiant, basically keeping you alive at all times as long as you can keep that timer up. And you will be able to keep that timer up as long as you're using a really powerful solar exotic primary weapon like Polaris Lance, Sunshot, or Vex Mythoclast. All 3 of those are extremely good options and make Ember of Empyrean actually kind of OP. Pairing with Ember of Empyrean, I always use Ember of Solace, just so that way I get double the timer whenever I get Radiant or Restoration. This is so nice, especially in Grandmasters, because otherwise you'll find that you get Restoration or Radiant, but the timer is so short that it goes away so fast, and you don't get to benefit from those effects as much. Conversely though, if you don't like Ember of Solace, another fragment that you could swap this out for is definitely Ember of Combustion. This one is really nice. This basically makes your solar super cause a ton of ignitions, clearing all the adds and stunning unstoppables. I found myself swapping out from Combustion and Solace based on the activity. If there were unstoppable champions, I would use Combustion, and if there's no unstoppable champions, then I'm going to use Solace. Both are excellent options, but the next 2 you should definitely keep on no matter what the activity, and that of course is going to be Ember of Singeing and Ember of Searing. Both of these work when you apply Scorch to enemy combatants, which means that they're going to give you your melee, class ability, and grenade energy, all for defeating Scorch combatants. And on top of that, the reason why this build has such beautiful synergy is because of this aspect here as well, where those Scorch combatants are also going to create sunspots for you, and if you go to stand in those sunspots, it will then give you Restoration, which when you stand in that, you'll get a longer timer of Restoration because of Solace, and then you can continue that Restoration timer with Empyrean, making every single fragment extremely valuable, which is why I recommend that you start with these if you're going to use this build. And then if you want to experiment or create some variations, feel feel free to do so. But truly, this build is so powerful and so potent when done right, as you can see in the gameplay behind me here. Now moving on to the exact weapons we're using. Of course, we're using a Riptide or the Deliverance if it's a stasis surge activity. If it's a strand surge activity, then we're going to use the scatter signal. This season, the GMs have two different surge modifiers on them that you'll notice here. It'll either be strand or stasis surge, one darkness surge, and then the other surge will be a light based surge. At least that's what we've seen so far in this season. This week it's solar, last week it was also solar, which is why we really want to use strand and solar weapons, strand or stasis weapons in the kinetic slot based on the surge, and then solar or void weapons in the energy and power weapon slot based on the other surge that we get. For the weapons, my main weapon for GMs this season is Polaris Lance. This thing is just so free and so easy to use. Honestly, it makes challenging endgame content kind of easy, and while it might make things kind of boring in some ways, there's nothing more frustrating than wiping in a GM, which is why I continuously bring you guys builds where I focus on the best weapons in the game, and Polaris Lance is one of those weapons this season, so make sure you dust it off and try it if you haven't yet. For the heavy weapon, you could use whatever you like, but I choose to use a heavy weapon that is solar, so that way it matches with the surges on my boots with my energy weapon. You could alternatively make your power weapon a stasis weapon to match the affinity of your kinetic, stasis or strand surges on. That decision is entirely up to you. Now let's move on to the mods that we use. On the helmet, of course, we're going with Heavy Ammo Finder and Heavy Ammo Scout. This creates a really nice infinite power ammo loop for you and all of your teammates. Make sure before launching any of the GMs that you tell your teammates, hey, can you put these two mods on, Heavy Ammo Finder and Heavy Ammo Scout? That way we can all work together to give each other power ammo, making the activity much easier. It's no secret that power ammo is the most powerful. Even Polaris Lance can't compete with the best power ammo weapons when it comes to clearing bosses and champions and stuff like that, which is why you're going to want both of these mods on pretty much all of your GM builds this season. And then lastly, we're going to use a Solar Siphon because we're shooting all the red bar enemies with the Polaris Lance, which is also in turn making us power ammo for ourselves, for our teammates, and making us orbs. This gives us the perfect helmet synergy. Make sure you're using these three mods on probably most of your builds this season. Now on down to the gauntlets. The first mod I'm going to be using is Harmonic Loader. This is going to make my Polaris Lance reload a little bit faster. And then the next two mods are Momentum Transfer and Bolstering Detonation. Both of these mods are focused on my grenade dealing damage and therefore giving me class ability and melee energy. Now obviously because I have a thermite grenade, it repeatedly goes out and does more and more damage to enemies, which is why I chose to put these two on over putting on Focusing Strike and Impact Induction, which of course would give me more energy when I get a shoulder charge. You might think that, well, Lucky, you're using a Peregrine Greaves build. Your entire build is focused on melees. Why wouldn't you want melee oriented mods? And the reason is because even though we do have a Peregrine Greaves build on, we're only using our shoulder charge to attack champions. If you use your shoulder charge on anything that isn't a champion, you'll find that it actually doesn't do that crazy of damage, and you'll use up your entire melee energy, meaning that you won't have your melee back for when the next champion spawns in. So I would highly recommend to actually use grenade oriented mods. And now let's move on to the chest piece. Of course, we're going with our usual Rainbow Resist, Solar Arc, and Void Resist for the GMs, keeping a distance with Polaris Lance. But when the time comes and when it's time to ape in their shoulder charge, we're going to hit them hard. And for that reason alone, I would consider swapping one of these out for a melee damage resistance if you're finding that you're dying a little too much when using this build. Myself personally, I did die a few times when aping in there to get the shoulder charge on the champions, but because all of the enemies were shooting Solar, Arc, and Void at me, I decided not to rotate these through. If there was only Solar and Arc enemies shooting at me, then I would definitely swap out the third mod for a melee damage resistance. Now moving on down to the boots, the exotic boots that make us lore accurate titans. Right here we have Peregrine Greaves. These things have been buffed and they are so good now. They make all of your shoulder charge abilities for Arc, Solar, and Void Titan deal bonus damage when activated in the air. And this does take a little bit of a setup though, so don't expect to just do a small sprint. You're going to need a couple extra steps because Bungie did change that element to them. So just be mindful of that if your melee doesn't do omega damage the first time you hit a champion with it, it's probably because you didn't get the proc in time. Make sure you sprint from about, I don't know, 20-30 meters away and jump in the air just before hitting your shoulder charge. Making sure to time it just right though, that you don't shoulder charge over the champion's head, because that's really embarrassing, and that did happen to me a couple times and I did die and I was sad about it. So using your shoulder charge in that manner will give you that incredible damage bonus. Now the key that's really interesting to using this now is that damaging mini bosses, tormentors, or champions with your shoulder charge refunds your melee immediately. So you'll notice that as soon as I hit the champion, I get my full melee energy back. So long as I don't hit their immunity shield, keep that in mind. It's also very embarrassing when that happens. And then the last bit is provides a small benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. That is going to have absolutely zero utility inside the Grandmasters. I would not recommend jumping up in the air, but if for whatever reason you do, I guess you'll hit your shots. Now the mods we're going to be putting on the Peregrine Greaves, of course we got Recuperation. Picking up an Orb of Power is going to give us a chunk of health. This I use on almost all my builds, so powerful, so strong. And then double Solar Weapon Surge, so that way the Polaris Lance and my power weapon are benefiting benefit from that damage buff. Now moving on down to the class item. For the 3 mods we have here is Time Dilation to make our Solar Surge timer last longer, and then we're going to use Powerful Attraction, so every time we pop that Titan Wall, we'll pick up all of the orbs nearby, also adding to our armor charges. And then lastly, we do have Proximity Ward, and you're definitely going to want this one because oftentimes you'll go in for the shoulder charge and the champion will be left one shot. For some reason, if the champion is debuffed with either a solar ability or the div, and your third teammate doesn't do any damage to them at all, they will have exactly just enough health to not die to the one-hit kill shoulder charge, which you will then want to immediately hit a finisher on them. This is what I did time and time again in the Grandmasters because I was doing carries, and for whatever reason, the carry didn't shoot the champion. And so I had to do it all myself, which is okay. But just keep that in mind if you do have a Peregrine Greaves Titan on your team. They're going to need just a little bit of help if you want to kill that champion instantaneously. But if not, it's really not even a big deal. Like, I don't mind finishing the champion every time, especially with Proximity Ward because it gives me that super powerful overshield. So I really didn't mind having to finish the champions. And keep in mind that the way Peregrine Greaves work is that it's actually just based on a hit with the Greaves. You don't have to get a kill. As long as you just hit a champion, you can hit it over and over and over again with the Greaves. So don't worry about it. You don't have to actually get a melee kill to get your refunded melee. And that's everything in regards to the mods from helmet to class item. Now we'll go over the stats. The least important stat, of course, is going to be mobility. We don't need any of that for this Titan build. 100 resilience is the most important. 100 discipline is the second most. Recovery is not that important, but it's also not bad. Intellect is not very important for this build. And strength is huge though. You're going to want probably at least 70 strength like I have here. What you'll find is that occasionally you hit the wrong add with your melee, or you hit an immunity on the boss. And then when you lose your melee, you feel like you have nothing. You feel like you're running around naked out there. So you're going to want pretty high strength so you can get your melee back, or just be an absolute G and never mess up your melee. But best of luck to you if that's the route you want to go. Now, the last thing that we have to break down, of course, is going to be our artifact mods for this season. It's very important that you pick the right mods here. If you don't, you're gonna have a bad time. Of course, we have Rays of Precision, so that way we get ignitions from a Polaris Lance. Then we have Revitalizing Blast, so that way we can debuff enemies both from our Thermite Grenade and all of our shoulder charges. And we're gonna have Heart of Flame, so that way our hammer is even more powerful when we're standing near teammates. And on top of that, keep in mind that you want to stand inside the sunspot when you pop your hammer because of the second part here on Soul Invictus, which reads your abilities regenerate faster and your super drains more slowly while standing in a sunspot. This is really important. Pop your super, it makes a sunspot. Stand in it near your teammates to do increased damage. You're going to be doing crazy hammer damage and it's going to last longer. Make sure you use your hammers right when you're using them in PvE, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. The next two mods work perfectly together. We have Flint Striker, which is rapid solar weapon precision hits, and solar weapon final blows grant radiant. So this is shooting your Polaris Lance. Your Sunshot, your Vex Mythoclast gives you radiant, and when you get radiant, your solar weapons are going to apply Scorch to those combatants. Applying Scorch to those combatants does so many things for this build, it is ridiculous. It's giving you your class ability, your melee, your grenade energy, creating sunspots, and on top of that, you're getting radiant, which buffs weapon damage. Lastly, the mod we have on here is Torch while radiant. Your strand and stasis debuffs make your weapons do more increased damage, which is why we have a Riptide on with Chill Clip. Then for the last three mods down here, we have From Whence You Came, which is an artifact perk that will increase the ability damage to taken and scorned combatants, which of course is imperative. We're literally using a shoulder charge. We want to do as much damage as possible when we hit a taken with this shoulder charge. Peregrine Greaves and your grenade do a lot more damage when using this mod, so make sure you have it on. Then you also do want Wished Into Being, so that way you'll create some orbs every time you get a thermite or shoulder charge kill. And then lastly, I have Dragon's Bite on, which will freeze targets when I break their shields with the Riptide, which is honestly something that I don't do that often, but at least to have it on because none of the other mods are actually going to add anything to this build. And that is everything for the lore accurate Titan build. This is easily my most fun build. Even if you're not a Titan maid, you can at least comment down below and appreciate the gameplay behind you here. Running around, punching everything is beautiful. This is what we Titans live for. That and eating crayons. Let me know your thoughts about this video down in the comments below. Smash the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed, and click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. And if you're feeling thirsty out there, make sure to use code LUCKY10p to save some money on G Fuel. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch and Kick. I go live all the time playing Destiny 2. Lastly, make sure you're following me on X, Instagram, and TikTok, where I deliver Destiny 2 news to you daily. I appreciate all the followers out there.